granted that you've spared some time to share with us this evening, to reflect on the lives of journalists that were lost in the line of work and serving their nations and their people, as well as the journalists that are under siege in the newsrooms, outside the newsrooms, and wherever they are. Tonight's panel discussion will be addressing the theme violence against women journalists. So under violence against journalists, we are zooming in on violence against women journalists, because that has become a serious concern in our industry. Yes, indeed, it is a global issue, but we have to address it here at home first. And then the role of public leadership and the integrity of elections. We welcome, Shalikan is here, and she will be talking about the issues around women and violence in the newsroom and violence against women in the line of duty. Mr. Nakuta will be talking about elections, and Shemaine will be talking about the role of strong public leadership. So as we begin, Shalikan, can you give us a brief overview of what do you think are the underlying causes or factors contributing to the prevalence of violence against women journalists in the newsroom?
Jemima, I mean, to look at that, firstly, you have to look at working conditions, and as well as the people who we deal with and in the newsrooms. If I can be honest, we have about, so I can't even put it in figures. Can we say this? Every journalist I've spoken to, women journalists, have experienced violence, whether in work or whether they are on duty or whether they're in the office or wherever they are. They've experienced violence, online and offline. I think one of the causes is that people, back in the day, I've always heard some of my senior women journalists say that sometimes it was easier to use your femininity. It was easier to use the fact that you're a woman to get information from certain sources. And that opened the door to a lot. We often have women journalists go ask a source, and let me be specific, ministers and deputy male ministers and male deputy ministers. And the first thing is they make advances. They'll say, "Hi, you look beautiful today. Look at that skirt. It fits you well." If we look at the joke of Okaditunga itself, one of our senior journalists, when they produced a show, essentially, and they were asked, "Oh, you're wearing from the specific person who's named after it." And that person asked, "Oh, you're wearing Okaditunga for me." And I think it was also because of that tradition of sort of, or that idea of use your sexuality to get a story, to get a tip, to get a comment, has definitely opened the door to violence against women. And it's still sort of asked of journalists, from senior male journalists, from mentors, from editors, to use that, number one. Number two, working conditions. The poorer the working conditions, the more you are desperate to get a permanent job, to get some sort of benefit, to get whatever you need. Because, I mean, if you look at Namibia right now, if you look at the media industry right now, it's either you have a permanent job or you are not being paid for 3 months, 4 months. And I've seen women journalists say, "Okay, you know what, I'm going to use my sexuality to get it." And then that essentially ends up, because of the working conditions that they have. A lot of the journalists don't have contracts, and to get that contract, what will you do at the end of the day? We have recently read about the story of sexual harassment being rife at the Namibia. And how far-fetched is it? If you ask a previous journalist, if you ask a current journalist at the institution, they will tell you some sort of story of what has happened. And this is not just the Namibian. This is the entire media industry, the entire industry, and obviously the women in the industry. I mean, you could ask my senior male journalists. They've seen it. the idea that it isn't there is the wildest thing that we are playing a game of. I haven't heard it. You have probably heard it in the corridors. I mean, just on the causes of it, and it's no excuse. I mean, it's not like it's. Oh, you're making an excuse for it. It's not an excuse. It's the reality that women journalists. I mean, how many women journalists have you seen in leading a media house? How many women journalists are editors? How many women journalists are deputy editors? And that's just editors. I'm not talking about the news editors. I'm talking about editors alone. Those who run media houses. Let's come to the news editors now. I can count two. And I've only been here 5 years. And I haven't, and NBC has one. And to be honest, I don't see myself being an editor. I don't see it. It's a very different, I don't think I want it. Because the idea of putting my mental health aside, the idea of putting myself in a position to be constantly undermined, as much as you can grow, no, my mental health is very important.
Thank you very much, Shaligan. Mr. Nukuta, Shaligan has raised two very important issues. The fact that women journalists are put in positions where they essentially are co-opted and they're not given real power. That has also been a major issue that has been reported to NAMPU, where journalists were put into senior, per se, they were promoted, but they were literally fought out of that position, and they were told every single day that they're not good enough. And then we have what I believe is financial warfare, where journalists are underpaid. We call it, amongst ourselves, we call it slave wages. And we know about this, everybody knows about this. In fact, people would tell you, we know, leading journalists, leading editors keep saying that journalism is for those who are in it for the passion, and yet these are the people who actually take home the big cash, the people that drive the luxury cars, the people that have homes, the people that actually have bonds, while we have journalists out here that are staying in shacks, people who can't even take a taxi. Some people must actually walk. Some people that come to events like this one, where they can get food, a little bit of food in the stomach, and people say journalists only go where there's wine and there's food. Yes, we go where there's food, because some people don't have food. So what do you think should be done to address this financial warfare, and where journalists, female journalists in positions are co-opted and not given real power?
Journalists, first and foremost, are workers. And as workers, they are covered by the Labor Act. There's one specific provision in the Labor Act that applies even to people that are not ordinarily covered by the Labor Act, specifically those in uniform, meaning the police, the defense, those working in correctional service, and in the correctional service, as well as the Namibian Intelligence Service. Why do I mention that? Journalists, as I said, are workers, so the entire Labor Act applies to journalists. And if those that formulated or enacted the Labor Act saw it fit that one specific section in the Labor Act, namely Section 5, that is dealing specifically with discrimination, should apply to all kinds of workers. It just goes without saying, journalists are specifically also included. Your question probably would be, so what is Section 5 of the Labor Act dealing with? Section 5 of the Labor Act is dealing with the right not to be discriminated against. And then there is a specific provision that says that every worker that has been subjected to sexual harassment, if that worker were to resign, that is not considered as a result of sexual harassment. that is not considered as just an ordinary resignation. In the eyes of the law, it is regarded as a constructive dismissal. So in other words, based on what I've just heard, the first thing that comes to my mind, if it is that we really have instances of you do this for this kind of a situation, in the media houses, sexual favors. I am in the academic space. In the academic space, we've got the evil of sex for marks. So here you've got not sex for marks, but you've got a job, if I got it correctly, a scoop for sex. Or is that what it's called? That is nothing else but sexual harassment. If such a person, such a journalist, in terms of our law, were to resign, in terms of the Labor Act, that would be regarded as a constructive dismissal, which will have to be proved otherwise by the employer, in this case the media house. So what is supposed to be done, and this is where your union must begin to come in, because such journalists or people that are subjected to such thing needs to be protected. And that is where the role of the union comes in, who are protecting such female or even male journalists, because we shouldn't think for 1 minute that there might not be male journalists or even people that are non-gender conforming, that are not subjected to the same kind of problems or complaints that you are referring to. So it seems there's a work for your union to be done, because that is an issue, and people that are victims of such kind of sexual harassment, they need to be protected. That's how I would answer your question.
Thank you so much, John, for your remarks. Charmaine, in light of what John has said, can you give us your view on how you think strong public leadership would contribute to reducing violence and ensuring the safety of journalists, particularly women in Namibia?
Yeah, Jemima, thank you for the question. So I never like to be the devil's advocate, but I think I am going to be that, even though I'm from the union. But I feel like, in terms of Namibia, as journalists, we have it sort of easy. Not that easy, like when we talk about impunity, of course, we have the case of Jonathan Bierkes, our colleague who was doing his job, and whatever happened, and he got suspended for that. That, I totally understand, but in the sense that we have it easy. Namibia is one of the countries in Southern Africa. Namibia, I think South Africa as well, has it a little bit easy in terms of impunity, as well as Botswana in Southern Africa. I'm only talking about Southern Africa, where, we can do our jobs, and you are not crucified for it, you're not ostracized for doing your job. Of course, there's been a case, you and I, Jemima, during COVID times where we, had an encounter with police. You and, yes, okay, yes, we were assaulted by the police. And then I think there's another colleague of ours from the coast as well, Evelyn, who was also assaulted by the police. But we've not really been arrested, we've not really been, in that, been sentenced for, and we've not died as well for the craft. Of course, there's been those like an incidents where that happened, like my case and then Evelyn's case and so forth. So I would say that you know, the public, you know, not public, but the government can make it easier for us to operate in the sense that, you know, like the access to information bill, like just, you know, fast track it a little bit, you know, and then just information, like I've seen colleagues who in the newsroom, when we're talking in the newsroom and we are talking about PROs, and we are like, I sent questions 2 weeks. I'm like, how do you send questions 2 weeks ago and you are still struggling to get your response? I'm like, how is it possible to be waiting for your response for so long? You know, that I think that is the case with Namibia, like waiting for your response for a month. I remember Shaligan spoke about it. She waited for her response for like 3 months or so. And that is not acceptable. But in the sense of being, I mean, we've not seen a journalist die, you know? So this is why, like, for instance, days like today are very important in the sense that we stand in solidarity with our colleagues in other countries. We have countries like Zimbabwe, you know, and Eswatini, where colleagues are really facing troubles in terms of impunity. You can really see. I read somewhere, I don't know if it was in Zimbabwe, where the vice president fainted and then the colleagues were told, delete. You know, so for Namibia, like I really feel there. Sorry for the Namlish, but I really feel in Namibia we've really, of course, there's been situations, but we have it a little bit easier than other colleagues, and I would feel like we need to commemorate this day and be in solidarity with our colleagues elsewhere. And this is where I would also want to bring the case of the WikiLeaks founder, Julian Assange, who is being prosecuted, you know, and he's doing, he did his work as a journalist in line of duty. So, Jemima, to answer your question, maybe I would like to say that journalists must also not be afraid of criticism from government, because at the end of the day, we still make mistakes. Today, when I was posting my things on my social media platforms, and someone said, yeah, no, but you journalists are also just writing whatever you want to write. And I'm like, okay, give me a case in point, and they gave me a case in point, and I'm like, all right, I understand, but then I probed further, and they didn't give me more information in terms of that. But in as much as, you know, government can meet us halfway, access to information bill, have it there. Please, we need, like, I remember when the union sent out that petition to say, these are the PROs who are not, you know, meeting us halfway. These are the PROs who are not doing their work. And then they were so quick to respond. But we are still facing that whole crisis where we are waiting long for our responses. But, you know, government is that way. But as journalists, we need to also be open to criticism. We need to also be objective, always. Regardless, and I really think we are at most of the time, but yeah, so that is my view on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charmaine. Yeah, indeed, no one is beyond reproach. I absolutely agree with you. I do agree that we do not face the horrors that some other countries are facing, but my slogan is always, people didn't die until they've died. Assange wasn't imprisoned until he was imprisoned. So we must always remain alert, and that brings me to Shaligan. In what ways do you think journalists, organizations, and government can work together to make to create a safer working environment for journalists? Charmaine was just referring to the petition that we sent out, complaining about the conduct of public relations officers and government, and you know that some people have threatened journalists, saying that you are going to see the worst side of us now, and I think we've also experienced that we are actually seeing the worst side now. What do you say, Shaligan?
You see, there's such a disunity within the media space. I feel like from the top of media houses to the bottom, sometimes your editor, your MD doesn't always stand with you. And that is very disheartening when you're writing a story and and you hear your own editor speak badly about you, I feel like stand with your journalists, correct them where you need to correct them, like Shemaine said, but for media houses, essentially the stories don't just come. You don't just decide, oh, I'm writing a story and that's it. You are questioned, you're grilled about it, you need to defend your question. That's what I was taught, and it's always been the same every day. And essentially they know what the story is. So I'll start there. Let's start in-house. If we can stand in-house and you can have your editor and let's say your news editor, it starts there. Because essentially that's when the assignment starts. If your news editor and your editor-in-chief can stand for you and ensure that they can back you up, I think that's where we need to start. And if we can have unity within the industry, I remember when I was starting out, I'm going to name them now, I had journalists like Linia Dishena, Edward Mumbu, Sake Ikela, Jemima Beekers, and Ndapeshali Shaponale, always stand by their fellow journalists. They'll ask, let's say, for instance, I had asked a question and it wasn't answered. Sure as hell, my next journalist who would question that story and continue taking up that question. As for the public leadership, that's a difficult question. Because they tend to be on your side when you are on their side, and when you are not. I mean, just for instance, this day we had our deputy minister send out a message and say, "Oh, this day is important." But I mean, if they can make it a case in point and say, "No," obviously they won't if it's not in their interest. But the Access to Information Act hasn't been enacted as a result of funds. But once that is enacted, it will allow the flow of information to go. That's where we start, from the public side. I mean, there's been political will. They've pushed it through Parliament. Parliament did its side. It's now for the Ministry of Information and Communication Technology to ensure that it's enacted. We also have the governments allowing journalists to freely do their jobs without the threats. I know one of the journalists were doing a very good story about one of the universities, and there was a lot of backlash towards him. And if it's the truth, why are we fighting it? Because essentially it will come out. But if government can allow journalists to do their jobs without feeling, the information minister the other day said journalists should stop focusing on government, should start focusing on the private sector as well. Why would you say something like that? The former information minister said journalists are flies. If we have our information minister who understands journalism, we have MDs of companies calling journalists gossipers. What are we doing? Then don't own a media company, walk away. Then don't be the Minister of Information, say, give me another portfolio. Stand with the job that you were given. If the Information Minister can stand for the job, question things when they happen. When you are the Information Minister and one of your state, one of the media houses is under your ministry and one of the editors get fired, question it. Robustly question it. Why was he fired? Or why was he suspended? And not saying, it's not my issue, so, we are the freest we have the freest press here on the continent. We should act like it. And that goes for government officials everywhere. Look at, what's her name, Karen, in South Africa. The former president is took her and her colleague to court. And the government sort of just saying nothing. I mean, there's also that case where and in South Africa, where an opposition party member has released in Namibia a journalist number. Don't do that. Respect journalists. You know what your followers can do. You know what your voters can do. Another case in South Africa with, was it Karima Brown, where her address was published and her house was stoned. Allow people to do their jobs, whether it's the truth or not. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Shaligan. You raised very important questions, and I want to take it back to John. John, Shaligan was talking about Karen being dragged to court by the previous president. we are increasingly seeing political violence, administrative violence, where journalists are dragged to court just because people have money. We are increasingly seeing this happening, and we've also seen that journalists are beginning to censor themselves because they don't have the money to go to a court. They don't have any sort of money to do anything but to pay for daily expenses. What do you make of this, and how do you think is it affecting journalism at the end of the day?
Yeah. I must say that is a difficult one, because remember, the right to a good name, the right to a reputation, also equally accrues to politicians. And so one can't say that if a politician were to really objectively and rightfully think that my reputation has been injured, there's nothing that prevent that politician really to go to court and to institute a civil claim against such a journalist. Our constitution allows for that, and the right that politician is having really also is broad enough to allow for that. What we can thank God for is that in Namibia we do not have the crime, or we actually still have. What we all need to be concerned about in Namibia, even though it has never been used, at least as far as I'm concerned, we still have on our law books the crime of criminal defamation. So politicians, in terms of our system, is having their bread, or their bed, you said, excuse me for my language, they've got their bread buttered on both sides. They can opt, a politician, in terms of our legal system, and having the crime of criminal defamation still, which is a common law crime, which is still on our law books. If you were to write bad in a very insultive way about a politician, literally speaking, that politician may opt to sue you. In other words, go the civil route by instituting a civil claim against you. But in terms of the common law, because we are having criminal defamation, which is mainly only available to politicians, that person can also institute a criminal case against you under the rubric of criminal defamation, because in terms of the common law, that crime may only, or is only committed against those in high places and not the commoners like you and me. But coming back to your question, can we do something about preventing them from instituting civil claims against journalists? Strictly speaking, we can't do anything about it. But can we educate them, and can we conscientize them about the higher value that they've signed up to, so that they will not use the court processes to intimidate people, because they know the people that they are instituting these claims against do not have money, and it's a way to censor. So if they really believe in democracy, if they really believe in human rights, they would know that we can't do this, because unless obviously a journalist was outrightly malicious and was pushing also a very different and very fraudulent, so to use the word, agenda. And I want to hook on to what Shemaine was saying, because journalists are also human beings, and they are fallible, and they may sometimes be sidetracked and fall into, and even captured. We've seen it in South Africa, that certain media houses were actually part and parcel of the whole project of state capture. And those journalists they must be called out. So we can't use this. And of course, if someone really, in my opinion, made yourself really guilty, and of course, being John Nakuta, speaking your mind and not restricting yourself to self-censorship, I said to myself, I'm going to say, even at this platform that is meant for journalists, even some things that may not be so well received by journalists, but it must be said. And as Shemaine said, journalists are human beings, they are fallible, and they make mistakes, and they should avoid, and they should refrain and even desist from falling into the trap. And that brings me to my last point that I want to say on this. It is not for nothing that you are called the fourth estate. But that comes with a very specific obligation. Your loyalty is not towards government. Your loyalty is not towards a political party. Your loyalty is not even towards a specific individual. Your loyalty as a journalist, as part of being the fourth estate, is towards the citizens. The citizens rely on your work in order for them to exercise their right to freedom of expression. And it is therefore not for nothing that journalists are held to very high standards of neutrality, of balanced reporting, professional reporting, because the people depends on what has been reported on you. And it is for this reason that we can't take the role of journalists it was my last job. It was my last job, so I took it, and this is what I'm doing, and I'm not that serious. No. If that is the attitude, then I would dare say, then you are in the wrong profession. Because for me, a journalist is one that is having high professional standards in terms of ethics and morals and all those things that goes together with it. Thank you.
Thank you, John. You have spoken quite lengthy, but I want to add another question to you before we go on to Shemaine, just so we can talk about elections coming up next year. In your view, what measures should be implemented to enhance the safety of journalists during elections? But you've talked about the fact that journalists are not infallible and that they need to they need to commit to the higher standards of journalism. But we've also seen political party leadership calling press meetings to lash out the journalists, to intimidate them, using this to intimidate other journalists, because they've noticed that the people that report about them can defend themselves. So they are using these press conferences to intimidate younger generations of journalists. Can you please give your view on this?
In terms of I think it basically boils down to
Here you go.
If I get your and if I were to paraphrase your question, Jemima, is that how are journalists supposed to report on electoral issues? In preparing for this, I came across a very important document, and it says that don't fall into the trap, as you are now saying, of any political party or candidate. Because obviously politicians are cunning. They would want to get as good a coverage as they would want. But you being objective, you being neutral, you being professional in your work, the way you should do it is actually very simple. In terms of, if you were to go to a rally, the first question is, who was, in terms of your reporting, who was addressing the rally?
What was the key message of this rally? When did this rally take place or took place? Where did it take place? And why did it take place? So really, the straightforward formula is who, what, when, why, and where. And refrain from trying to give your own impressions of the rally. Because that, by doing that, you would fall into the trap of distorting facts. So, how to do it? Keep it simple. And don't fall into the trap of trying to be loyal to a political party. Because remember, and I'm going to use the example of Mr. Lucato. Mr. Lucato, in 2000, when did we have the last elections? 2019. I was a rookie in terms of the position that I'm currently occupying, and I really didn't know, to be very honest, how do I deal with this matter. He approached me in 2018, beginning 2019, and he complains. He would send invitations to various media houses, including the NBC. They would go to his rallies, and obviously we know his rallies are held under a tree, and there are no people there. And so he's complaining that he's never been given any coverage. So much so that he complained to the media ombudsman. And the question is, to all journalists, if it is about reporting, what happened, who was there, what was the message, and why was that message? If it is about that simple formula, you will not bother in terms of who presented and whether that person is having a following in Namibia. So, and this is how you avoid to be seen and misinterpreted as journalists of pushing a certain agenda. As Charmaine was saying, people out there are saying that journalists are having a specific agenda because you are giving your own impressions. Whereas as a journalist, sometimes, unless it is an editorial, but if it's a news article, you are not supposed to give your own impressions. Then you must use other platforms. Yours is to report objectively, neutrally, and not to look at the John Nakutas of this world. How will I portray this person in the media? Then you've missed the boat.
Charmaine, I'm going to change your script a little bit. Can you give us your view on what do you think political leaders and government authorities should do to promote press freedom, but also to ensure that journalists work independently and without any violence and threats during their in their line of work?
Jemima, I love that question. But I want to come back to your earlier question before. I want to say something that, you know, there's something as journalists that we hear that it's a passion, but passion does not pay my bills. Passion does not put food on my table. So I want to go back to that. I need to emphasize that for everybody. And for I think our employers must also know that passion does not pay my bills. But anyways, in terms of your question, I'm hoping that, you know, we have elections coming up next year, We have elections coming up next year, and I'm hoping that it will be different from what's happening in, you know, our neighboring countries. I mean, we have Zim, where really, opposition is still, I think they are still fighting, that those elections were rigged, and journalists are reporting on it, but I think journalists don't really, have more information, or not, information is not really being released, draconian laws. I mean, journalists are being abducted for reporting on this and so forth. But yeah, for Namibia, I think what would happen is, let's hope that we have access to everything, and let's hope that, the access to information bill is sitting with the president currently. The president must, access to information bill is with the president. I think I speak under correction, but the president must sort of, sign it off, or whatever must happen there. But once that happens, let's hope that next year's elections, we have, all the access to everything. Apart from having access to, vote first. Because I remember the last elections, and I was like, I'm a journalist, let me just vote, and then I can work. And then they were like, where's your proof? But I'm hoping that, there's like transparency from government, and there's transparency just from also all the polls. And in terms of, I remember the last elections, there was a story written, I don't know if it was the Namibian or the Namibian Sun, where there were ballots dumped somewhere, and then after that, I don't know, it just died. So we need more information on that. We just need transparency from our leaders when it comes to the elections. We need that, if something happens, call a press conference. Don't make journalists wait for, because we already have the information, we just want confirmation. I'm now thinking of the story of, I think most newsrooms were going through that, the story of the man who allegedly abused his pregnant girlfriend. And then the police decided they will announce it on the NBC before they give it to everybody else. And in our newsroom, we were like, but NBC, why? We are all journalists and we are all newsrooms. So we want everything to be accessible to everybody. I think that's your question, right? We want everybody to be able to, like NBC is not the last or the first news source, because we want that if you want to wait for 6 p.m. news or whatever time news plays, then just send out a statement. It will still air on NBC. So we want to put it in the sense that it must be accessible to everybody. I think with next year's elections, journalists must be there, make it transparent. Just to answer your question, we want transparency as journalists, just transparency, and we are all journalists at the end of the day.
So we'll take just 2 questions, since we've already been asking questions here, and then we'll round it up after that. So we have 2 questions again. Emil, you can go first.
Thank you so much. Normally, the panelists and myself are the ones complaining when we are limited to questions. And at our own event, we are limited to questions, so I don't know how that works. My name is Emil Khamrosebep. I was recently assigned to Zimbabwe to cover the elections in that year, in that country. And before that, I had no comprehension when the speakers and government and experienced journalists would say, and the reports would say, that we are the freest press in Africa, because what I experienced there was absolutely, and they say it gets worse as you go west, north, east Africa. So I just need a round of applause for being the freest press in Africa. Indeed. Mr. Nakuta, I absolutely understand your point. It is actually absolutely correct, but I just want to make an example. There was a silence from media practitioners that actually witnessed what happened that day, and the focus was rather on the evidence that was given in court. And media practitioners that were there know that this evidence is not correct. We saw, I I need to be careful with my wording. I want to use the word opinion. But we saw that this was an arbitrary arrest. We were there. We know what transpired that day. And witnesses from the state are giving absolutely the opposite of what happened. And as media practitioners, we keep quiet. Is this then a news article, or is it then an editorial? After we have witnessed, and now because we are guided by the principle of telling the story that happened in court, do we keep quiet as media practitioners? I have raised this issue with on the police platforms. I have raised it with journalists also, to say, guys, we know the person that is in the wrong here. We know what transpired that day. We were there from the beginning to the end. We have this on video. So maybe advice on a matter like that. Do we then divert this to an editorial? Do we include this in the story? Does it become, do I involve myself if I include this in the story? Because until now, I feel that there should be an answer. I've written numerous letters to the police immediately, a day after the judgment, and I've not received any answer. I've written to the highest office. I started with procedures, looking for answers to ask, are you going to appeal? Because you were so convinced at what you did was procedural, it was correct. You were so convinced, I believe the actions were uncalled for. So what is the way forward? What do you make of the judgment? I'm still waiting for a response from the police. It's been about 3 or 4 weeks. So maybe if you can comment or advise, I hope my comment/question is clear. Thank you so much.
I just want to add on to what Emil said. We were there together, and there's also come a point where I was wondering if it would be my place to share the footage that I have of how things transpired, where Amoshilelo actually told people to keep it down. He kept saying discipline. What was the word? High moral, high discipline. And I drove literally in front of the march, so I saw how he would tell people, guys, if you have to turn off here, you can. If your house is here, please turn off here. Don't make noise. And the others, let's just walk together without making noise. So I was also wondering, how do you share this information if you are asked for this footage at one point, if you are asked for a comment as a journalist? Where exactly do you stand?
Tough questions, guys. In criminal law, there is this crime which may be committed outside the court. Contempt of court. Contempt of court may be committed inside the courtroom, where the accused person or any one of us that may go and attend a court proceedings may behave in a manner that is disrespectful. And then you can be convicted there for contempt of court. But contempt of court may also be committed outside of the court. And this is where the line is becoming the issues are becoming very, very dangerous for journalists. Contempt of court outside is now where you, like as a journalist, is writing on a story that is already being started inside, the trial started, but you are reporting on this matter in a way that can be seen to influence the outcome of the case. And that would be regarded as trial by media. And so for the late, for example, is it Smitty? Smith was convicted of contempt of court because in his case, not so much because he reported on a matter, he refused, and correct me if I'm wrong, refused to disclose his sources, if I'm not mistaken. But in your case, if you were to write after the commencement of the trial of the young man in a manner that is now trying to show that what is happening there is a bogus kind of a trial, that would be very, very dangerous. Because you cannot be seen to try and influence the process. But I would say, and I'm really sitting here and said, this is really a very difficult question. Probably before the commandment, before the guy has pleaded not guilty, then by all means, because this is not yet really a trial. But once that has happened, you can't do that, because you would be seen to making yourself guilty of trial by media. Is there a place, even afterwards now, to show that this was a clear case of abuse of power? By all means. And this is where the role of investigative journalists comes in. We know it from the beginning, but because of the high standards and what we know, that we didn't want to fall into this trap, we did not disclose this. But if you were to disclose that kind of information now, in a very critical article and investigative piece, to actually, what would be the right word, to expose those leaders that have signed up to high positions without believing in the values of what a true democracy is. There's nothing wrong in writing your critical piece now. That would be my answer to your question. I don't know whether I've also through that answered your question now, but certainly not whilst the trial is ongoing. That would be dangerous.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Ogito Greg. I'm a career journalist and I'm very passionate about it. Firstly, I'd like to say that our position as the freest press in Africa is very fragile. It might speak about freedom of expression, but freedom of expression even here in Namibia is constantly under attack. Last year, the Namibian police instituted a practice which requires anybody who wants to protest to go to the nearest station commander, ask for permission, and pay a fee for the right to protest. That is the reality in Namibia today. And more action is being taken to undermine any citizen's freedom of expression all the time. And with the elections coming up next year, there is currently a new bill which has been approved by Cabinet for new rules regarding public gatherings and any kind of protest. No information about this bill has been shared with the public to date, and we can expect it at any time when it suits the powers that be. Now, there was something that you said about how the union has its work cut out for it. But I'm sure you are aware that the union, since its founding, is still not registered by the Ministry of Labor, which means that the union cannot have membership, it cannot have standing, it cannot protect its members, it cannot gather any funds. The reason why the union has not been registered is because the ministry is not happy with our constitution. We have submitted the constitution 4 times. The ministry is not happy. We have paid for a lawyer to go through our constitution point by point to tell us where we must improve. The lawyer said there's nothing wrong with your constitution. We resubmitted. The ministry says they are not happy. And in effect, that means that the union the first of its kind in Namibia, doesn't have the tools with which to defend or do any of the work that you allude to that needs to be done. Finally, I'd just like to point out that journalism is not an easy profession. We need protection. And though journalists in Namibia have not been jailed and shot, there are many who have died, whether it is from substance abuse or from any other social ill, because the pressure is huge. Today, somebody is your greatest fan because the content of your story was in their favor. Tomorrow, you did the same thing. You went through the same steps. You adhered to the rules of journalism, but the content of this news is not in that person's favor, and you are vilified. At any given time, anyone can turn against you, and we crack. So, my question to you, sir, what will you do to provide us, to help provide us with the protection that we need so that we are able to strive to the aspirations, the levels of professionalism that you require from us? Thank you very much.
I'm teaching administrative law at UNAM. Administrative law is dealing with Article 18. Article 18 of our Constitution is saying that administrative bodies and administrative officials shall, and I underline the word or emphasize the word, shall act fairly, lawfully, and reasonably at all times. And then Article 18 goes further in saying that aggrieved persons may approach a tribunal or a court of law to seek redress. I must admit, I followed the case of the non-recognition of the union with keen interest. And I said to myself, this might just be a clear case of abuse of authority. And I want to remind the union leadership of what our High Court have said in one case. And I'm paraphrasing, that in Article 18, we have been propelled from a culture of authority to a culture of justification, where the exercise of all power, all decisions must be justified. Not recognizing a union or not accepting rather a constitution because there was no comma, there was no full stop. It's simply put petty. It is a glaring abuse of power. And Article 18 talks about such kind of abuse of power. And if the union were to feel that this is unfair, because they are obliged, and I don't think it's the union, correct me if I'm wrong, it's the office, as I've heard you say, the ministry. But is it not the office of the Labour Commissioner? The office of the Labour Commissioner, him or herself, does not have any power not given to her, she's now acting, by any law. She can only do what has been given to her by law. And she cannot abuse her power. I'm not talking about Kiliki now. I'm now just saying that she's now the acting person. But the point is, officials are not supposed, in fact, they are not, the word supposed doesn't fit.
they are prohibited by law not to abuse their power. And I'm challenging, what can I do to the union? I can only advise you through your lawyers to challenge this form of abuse, because this is a clear case of abuse of power. I equally say, and this is where the union and the role comes in now as journalists, I've also followed with keen interest the idea of a demonstration that was called by one of the taxi unions, and they were told that as of now on, you need to pay a certain fee because we will have to escort you. They do, from my reading, they do not have the power to put and impose such a fine, or not a fine, such a request. As administrators, the police can only do what the law empowers them to do. Journalists are called upon to help us as academics to begin to research these kind of things through investigative journalists. What can I do? Not so much as media ombudsman, but I'm an academic. I may not assist you as the media ombudsman, but I can raise my hand as an academic, very specifically an administrative justice academic, a human rights law academic, and say, how can we combine forces to kind of expose these kind of abuses, because we cannot allow this. Lastly, in terms of next year, I've mentioned to Dixon, I'm playing around and I'm conceptualizing the idea of coming up with a joint project, of embarking on a joint election monitoring project. Because we shouldn't take it for granted. I totally agree with you. We may be the freest press, but undercover there are things that are happening that are not so free. And for that reason, we must monitor who gets coverage, when does this person or party get coverage, who does not get coverage. And when I talk about coverage, we shouldn't make the mistake that we only think about public media houses. We also are thinking of private media houses, community media houses, in terms of they are also held to the very same standard in terms of fairness and professionalism. And also we shouldn't think of, we are only thinking about the television. We are talking about all media platforms, print, broadcast, online, and you name it. If we talk about the standards that we are saying we are adhering to and we want to live up to in terms of the monitoring, we must then begin to monitoring not just the NBCs of this world, but the Namibians of this world, the new eras of this world, what are the other names? The Namibian sons of this world, the Informantes, the Confidantes, and all those ones, community radios, and that we mean business. And my last, I told Dixon in conclusion, unsurprisingly, my term of office expired, obviously at the end of August it expired, but surprisingly, and I don't know whether it's a good thing, I was given an extension for another 14 months as the media ombudsman. And what I want to do in this term, join forces with the purpose of monitoring the elections with those ones that are willing to begin to want to see whether or not the freedom that we so gladly talk about, can we really say that we are really that free and monitor our elections? Thank you.
I would like to say end of transmission, but since we are here and it's not every day that we have John here, I will allow 2 more questions, and then we must be end of transmission.
Good evening, everyone. I think my question is directed to the Media Ombudsman. My name is Justicia Shipena. I'm a journalist for Eagle FM. So the Ministry of Labor has been busy with the minimum wage establishment. The bill or the talks has been with the minister for about a year now. Consultations have taken place with the Minimum Wage Commission. And since we're talking about my patient doesn't pay my bills, I just wanted to get from the Media Ombudsman, where is your stance when it comes to minimum wages for journalists, and have you participated in these consultations with the Minimum Wage Commission?
Okay, I'm Kagiso Moloi. I'm a broadcaster here at Desert Radio. I just want to know why there is fatigue on the war between Russia and Ukraine. We don't hear any news covering it. We hear now Gaza and Israel. Why is there fatigue? Why? Somebody asked me this morning, what's happening in Russia? I said, I don't know. Why are we quiet?
I promise I won't be so elaborate. Whether I was part of it, I was not really part, but I was asked by the commissioner, the chairperson of the commission, Dr. Marius Kuduma, to make a submission because of my stance on human rights. And I can publicly say that I've made a submission in my own capacity. And then, of course, what is my view on a national minimum wage for journalists? But I would rather not say journalists. The way I approach it in my submission, that's what I want to do. We've got the highest level of inequality. The second, they say, in the world. So something needs to be done. In fact, when I started in the Netherlands as a student many years ago, I was doing work during my holidays. But even then, as a student, there was a minimum working hour rate that even as a student I could not be paid less. And this is why in developing countries like the Netherlands, the inequality gap is not that much. So to answer the question, what is my view of a national minimum wage? Most certainly. Most certainly, and of course that would mean journalists would then also not be paid beyond or below that minimum wage. How much? They are normally saying, the experts are saying, it is not something that needs to be thumbs up. It is something that needs to be researched and stuff. So what would be, considering a lot of other factors, what would be the appropriate minimum wage for, in the case of Namibia, that kind of thing. So not so much. In fact, if you are now saying for journalists, then you are going the sectorial way, because Namibia is having that way. For domestic workers, it should be so much. For farm workers, it should be so much, and so forth. And if I get you correctly, you are saying then there must be another one for journalists. I don't know whether that is so advisable. Should we not have a national minimum wage? Because this is what some of us are believing in. Thank you very much.
Just a comment on Kagiso Moloi. Maybe rather the question would be, you respectfully introduced yourself as a broadcaster. Have you stopped reporting on the Russia-Ukraine thing and the war there? And why have you stopped? Or are you asking us as individual media houses to do so? And then the other thing is, we recently, or not recently, as much as it's an embarrassment, I don't even know where it is, because we have a conflict, or had a conflict in Mozambique. We have a conflict going on in Congo. If Britney Spears arrives now, and NMH is very good at following South Africans around, if South African celebrities come here, they send out a whole team to follow them around the country. Or if I'm banned from a corporate bank today because they had a media day, and I asked all of us Namibian journalists, why are we being forced to listen to South African house music? Don't we have Namibian music? They wrote a letter to my Director General complaining that I was behaving untoward at their event and they can no longer have me there. So yes, they actually did. You remember that event where that corporate institution banned me because I asked, why are we being exposed to South African music? Where is Namibian? All of the journalists here are Namibians. So Dr. Maloy, I would rather ask you as a broadcaster, have you stopped reporting on the Russia-Ukraine war, and why? Is it because the influence comes from the Western media, that CNN and the BBCs are now reporting all of a sudden on that, and we follow instead of creating our own news? Congo and Mozambique has a conflict going on, and yet I've not seen anything from the institution I work for, to print, to social media, us reporting. But as a Namibian, we come and put emphasis still on the Russia-Ukraine. We know there's a corridor there that benefits us, but our own are suffering here, and we are not even paying attention. Even a journalist asked me on the group, what is going on in Congo? You know, so it's just a comment that I'm making, that we need to push our own agenda.
Yes.